Aha! It's the O Wrestling Podcast. I'm your host, CW, and today we're talking about Wrestle Buddies and other wrestling toys. Thank you so much for listening. Hit that bell on YouTube and make sure you subscribe to the podcast on any and all platforms. I would appreciate it if you tell a friend about it. Anyway, I was walking through Walmart with the family, and we stumbled upon some wrestling toys. And apparently Walmart has their own sort of signature WWE toys. It's called WWE Superstars. It's like old school, like squat, chibi like wrestlers. You know, they have Undertaker, they have Macho Man, they have Bray Wyatt in a gimmick I've never seen him in. He's like a carnival. What are the carnival hosts? What are they called? Ringmaster. He's like a ringmaster or something. There's Ted DiBiase, and I believe Ric Flair, and the Ultimate Warrior, and Papa Shango. I can keep going. Anyway, the toys brought back memories of, you know, having those old wrestling toys that did not move with zero. What is zero? Zero articulation, where the legs didn't move, the arms didn't move. They were in a perpetual, like, I'm angry, I'm gonna shout at the moon stance, where their arms were out and their legs were out. So it was so that you can smash them together and, you know, make them fight. But yeah, nothing moved, so you couldn't put them in any other poses. Those were the type of toys that I had. Those were the type of toys that I loved. I remember having a Junkyard Dog and a Hulk Hogan. The Junkyard Dog was a gigantic Junkyard Dog. He was big and, I think, this weird plasticky rubber, where he was very shiny and very stiff, but he had like some give to him. So if you pressed it, it felt kind of like a rubberized skin. And he had completely no articulation whatsoever, but he was huge. He was like a 12, 13, maybe 14 inch action figure. And then I had the normal size, like 8-inch Hulk Hogan, who the only articulation he had was at the hips, which, looking back, makes, you know, no sense. Like, you can swivel his hips completely around so that his ass was in front of him, but his legs, knees, feet, nothing on the bottom moved. It was always, you know, stiff. And then his arms, they didn't move up or down. They were in like again, I'm screaming at the moon, why did this happen to me pose. His arms outstretched, but nothing else moved. And you can turn his head. So you can turn his hips and his head. So what I would do is I would turn his whole waist around so that his ass was where his crotch should be. And then I would spin his head completely around so that he was looking at his junk. Like his head was facing his back and his junk was back there too. And then I would just pretend that Junkyard Dog completely ruined him for the WWF Championship. These are the games you have to make when there are no articulation in your action figures. And to be quite honest, there was a lot more creativity in the way you had to play when you couldn't do anything. Your brain had to work overtime to make sure that you were having fun. You were like, well, I guess, you know, they've been frozen by, you know, some sort of Mr. Freeze, but you just end up pulling in other action figures. Like Mr. Freeze froze them so that they can't move, and now that they have to fight for their freedom in a frozen state. Who knows? I don't know. Anyway, I've gone down a nostalgia rabbit hole. Fast forward, I'm standing in Walmart again with my children and my wife, and I'm staring at these wrestling toys, and I'm like, I'm gonna buy these, because there was a Papa Shango, there was an Undertaker, old school Undertaker, and there was an Ultimate Warrior. All three I simply had to own. I had to have them, had to keep them. I wanted them. And as an adult male who does surround himself with action figures, it felt right. I was like, okay, I don't own any, you know, memorabilia, any wrestling action figure memorabilia. So why not get these? They kind of look like the old school toys I used to play with. I'm getting them. So I picked them up, and I looked in the back, and I wanted a Macho Man. Obviously, Macho Man's great. He tags the end of the show. I was like, it would make sense for me to have the Macho Man. Of course, Macho Man wasn't there. They had Ric Flair. I didn't really care for Flair. Rhymed. And so I was just like, whatever, I'll get these 3 guys. They are currently behind me on my mantle. They're wonderful action figures. Now, while I'm having this nostalgia trip, my children, being the small people that they are, were looking at the shelves below knee level. And the shelves down there near the floor had wrestling buddies. I don't know if you guys know what wrestling buddies are, but they are what I just described, but plushy. There are, pillows with wrestlers on them that you can beat up. And when they first launched, I think it was in the late 80s, early 90s, wrestling buddies were all the rage. If you had a wrestling buddy, you were the shiz. It was at a time where they were when marketers were really pushing like the kind of My Buddy type thing, like the dolls for boys, where they were like, well, girls have all these dolls, so why don't boys have like buddies and friends as playthings? Like, we have all these dolls, let's just slap a boy's head on them and let's sell it to the guys. So that's when My Buddy came out. That's when the Wrestling Pals came out. That's when Teddy Ruxpin was being really creepy and weird, reading tapes that you stuffed in his gut. It was a fun time. Marketing was fun back then. But my kids see a Sting wrestling buddy, and I'm like, oh snap, they're wrestling buddies. Now, I did not have a wrestling buddy growing up, so again, I get kicked in the nostalgia, and I'm like, look, I need to fill that gap in my life that was obviously left, and I didn't know I had to fill it with a wrestling buddy. But they were AEW Sting wrestling buddies, and I don't know about you, but I don't care about Sting. I've never cared about Sting. I never will care about Sting. It's just me. I don't know. I didn't grow up with steeped in WCW. I didn't care. But my kids were like, oh man, Dad, we need to get this. My daughter's like, I want to kick its butt. Does it have and her first response after that was, do they have a Bianca? Her favorite, quote unquote, favorite wrestler is Bianca Belair. So I said, well, you got to look. I don't know if there's a Bianca Belair. Is there a Bayley? And I'm like, baby, I don't know. I'm not short. I can't see in there. So you have to tell me what's in there. And all the while, my infant son is like picking up Sting and throwing him across the aisle. And I'm like, he gets it. He understands what that thing is for. And I almost bought that Sting on principle because it seemed like my son was going to use it for, what it was for, which is to kick Sting's face in. But at the end of the day, I opted to not get it. Not because they didn't, deserve it or because I had some vendetta against Sting or even AEW. It's just that my daughter has a favorite wrestler, and if there's a wrestling buddy for that one, I would get it. And if there were other wrestling buddies, I'd rather have one that, I can relate to inside of this house. So maybe if they had an Undertaker, I would have gotten it. Or if they would have had an Ultimate Warrior, I would have picked it up. I remember seeing the old Ultimate Warrior and Undertaker and The Rock wrestling buddies when they started putting them out. They kind of cycled them in and out every generation. Because I remember the ones that my generation had. And then I remember kind of like the Attitude Era-ish, like going into quote-unquote Ruthless Aggression era when they had John Cena wrestling buddies. They kind of just say, hey, we have all these blank pillows. Who can we print on them and make some money? And it just, it always comes down to the top stars. So there's always an Austin, there was always a Rock, there was a John Cena. Now for some reason AEW found that stash of human-shaped pillows, and now they're just printing Sting on them because there was nothing but Sting. I'm almost convinced that the public bought every other good one and then just left the Sting one. Because look, when it comes right down to it, why would you want to just beat up on an old man? Sting is an old man, and I don't know about you, but I don't want to teach my kids to kick the crap out of old people. Anyway, did you guys play with wrestling toys growing up? What kind of wrestling toys did you have? Did they have articulation? Do yours have articulation? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for listening. Tell a friend. Tell 2 friends. Subscribe, and remember, I'm your friend.
I'm your friend, but if I ever see you in the ring, I can beat you. Don't you know? Yeah, yeah, yeah.